Welcome back to Petty Astrology. I'm your host, Kaycee Felton-Lui, and I did tell you. I told you it was gonna be weird. It was gonna be weird energy. We were gonna see some stuff that maybe we didn't expect, we weren't so sure about. And I know people are talking a lot about the big news and the election, and I probably am not going to spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about the election because I firmly believe that regardless of the outcome, our job is really the same. We are going to have to organize and resist fascism, which is being carried out by the US government, regardless of whether it's the red team or the blue team in office. And that is really the essence of what I'm seeing for Pluto in Aquarius. And again, if you're new to the podcast, Pluto is in Aquarius right now, and then we get a little break in September through part of November, and then Pluto moves into Aquarius for the next 2 decades. And that's a long time. And through this process, what we're going to see is human beings having to work together in ways that they may have not effectively worked together before. Because it's difficult to organize big groups of people if you've ever tried it. And the reason being is that power, resources are concentrated in the hands of a few people, the very wealthy, the very empowered, while we watch the rest of us struggle to pay our bills, struggle to survive, struggle against legislation that is threatening a large portion of Americans, all while our currently democratic government doesn't really give a fuck. And one of the things I wanted to talk about before we really get into this episode is the Olympics. Now, why would I be talking about the Olympics? Well, it starts this week on Friday, July 26th, so it's definitely timely. But the Olympics is one of those things. Obviously, it's countries and their athletes competing against one another. It's kind of a big deal, and people get to root for their team, their country. And so it is based in nationalism. And honestly, that's not even my main problem with the Olympics. It's really not. But every time there is an Olympics, it costs an enormous amount of money. A lot of resources are poured into every single Olympics. And they say that it helps the economy of the place that these games take place. And we have so many receipts because we've had so many Olympics of how absolutely false that is. In fact, Olympic Games typically are pretty devastating for the host cities in a variety of different ways, which I will touch on. This year we have the Olympic Games happening in Paris, France, and if you know anything about the French, they are pretty good at protesting. They will make a scene when some shit is happening with their government that they straight up don't like. And this is the first Olympic Games that we've had with Pluto in Aquarius since Pluto was first discovered by human beings. So this Olympics is going to feel a bit different than previous Olympics have felt. Now, Pluto is currently retrograde, so some of the upset, some of those differences I think might not be as dramatic as they would be if Pluto was direct. But I do think that the Olympics this year are going to feel really different because a lot more people are becoming very aware of the disparities between people with money and power and the rest of us. And that I think will be very obvious with the Paris Olympics. So I think it is actually the perfect time for the Olympics to come up for review. What's your beef with the Olympics, Kaycee? Is it because you hate sports and nationalism and fun? Look, I am not an athlete, but I totally respect that people are interested in seeing some of the most physically skilled people from all around the world do their thing. And years ago, I myself watched a little bit of the Olympic Games. I like watching the swimming and some other stuff, but I will not be watching the Olympics this year. And I haven't watched the last several Olympics because years ago, I became aware that the Olympics are really bad. And the organization that made me aware of these facts is called No Olympics LA. And this is a group that does resistance and education specifically around the Olympics here in Los Angeles. And part of the reason that this group sprang up is because the 2028 Olympics is scheduled to be here in Los Angeles. And it started in 2017, and it's actually a coalition of other local organizing groups that have come together to resist the Olympics specifically, because we all know that it's going to be bad for the city. But No Olympics LA has done an amazing job of assembling resources. They even have an actual syllabus if you really want to dive into what the Olympics is about, who is behind it, what it does to the cities that it happens in. So you don't have to take my word for it. There's a lot of reading material here, but I'm going to pull some highlights for you just so you can get an idea. So this is from the No Olympics syllabus. No Olympics LA formed to oppose the Olympic Games coming to Los Angeles in 2028 and is part of a transnational No Olympics Anywhere movement, seeking the abolition of the Olympics everywhere. Our coalition's opposition to the Games is informed by the history of the Olympics, from its roots in white supremacist imperialism to its ongoing track record of destroying host cities. Our opposition is also informed by our analysis of the current conditions of capitalism, in which powerful corporate and political actors have designed the Olympics as a tool to exploit and remake cities in the interest of global capital. The Olympics are fundamentally incompatible with the city and working class power that we're fighting for. And then this syllabus goes on to provide resources for people to educate themselves, or maybe if you are a professor or a student that wants to utilize these materials to educate more people on the realities of the Olympics, this is a great resource. And one of the amazing things about the Olympics is because it is this kind of nationalistic, international event, it is a cause that a lot of us can find connection to and find solidarity in. According to my research, the Paris Olympics will cost an estimated $8.2 billion to host. Apparently, this is the 6th most expensive Olympic Games of all time, so it's not the most expensive, but especially in a moment where so many people are struggling to afford their basic necessities, that is an enormous amount of resources and money that are going into something that ultimately isn't really going to benefit the people of the host city. But not only that, I also am reading that an estimated $3.2 billion of France's cost was spent on infrastructure investments in urban areas to get ready for the game. According to an article called Regression to the Tale: Why the Olympics Blow Up, every Olympics since 1960 has run over budget at an average of 172%. And the authors of this paper identify hosting the Olympic Games as an extreme risk because all of the data that they analyzed. And it's not uncommon for cities that host these games to lose money. Brazil lost about $2 billion when it hosted the Summer Games in 2016. The Summer Games in Tokyo lost about $800 million. And organizers for the Olympics, they always try to downplay this aspect of it because they say that it will revitalize tourism and bring people in. But the reality is that public dollars are often filling in the gaps and making these cities weaker after the Olympics leaves town. So to me, it really sounds like investor math. Like, yeah, I'm sure that the people that are invested in the Olympics make money off of it, but what about the rest of us? What about the people that live in these host cities? What about the people that are living on the streets in these host cities? Because when the Olympics comes to town, the city has to get ready, and one of the things that they do is they hire more police. They expand policing. I've said a million times, we are living in fascism. We are living in a police state. Just because somebody's not knocking on your door right now does not make that any less true. And I know it's not coming out of the Olympic budget to hire more police. That comes out of the city budget. And then they will have those police turn around and displace people who are already unhoused from the areas where these games will take place because it just doesn't look good for the host city. And I can tell you, as somebody that lives in a city with a large unhoused population, that the police are already really violent towards unhoused people. They are already very abusive. And so to hire more of them and to empower them further to harass people that have less than nothing is just one of the many negative things that come with hosting the Olympic Games. There's also gentrification. They're demolishing affordable homes in Los Angeles already to build more hotels for this. They'll also use the Olympics as a national security event, so it makes it easier to remove people that don't have papers, that are immigrants. And average people in these host cities have no say on whether this is going to happen or not. We don't really get to choose. I never voted for any of this. And No Olympics reminds us that there has always been resistance to the Olympics. We just didn't really hear about it. Nobody told us that in history class. So, reading from the No Olympics syllabus, the Olympics are rooted in white supremacy, imperialism, racism, sexism, ableism, classism, and elitism. The Olympics are built around war, not peace, and have always been political. The capitalist games are incompatible with building a just city. They always result in the same groups of winners and losers, widening the chasm between the two. They also talk about how the myth of a successful Olympics is one that is perpetrated by the media because, of course, media outlets make a ton of money off of promoting and covering the Olympics, so there's a lot of investment in perpetuating this idea that it's a great thing. The Olympics also says the Olympics exist to expand policing and surveillance, to displace the poor and pave the way for development and profit. And even in Los Angeles, the Olympics are, quote, accelerating and justifying ongoing projects of removal and gentrification. They also say the Olympics create cities for globetrotting elite at the expense of the most marginalized residents. And they also have a section in their syllabus talking about how the Olympics is very destructive for the environment and for indigenous peoples in whatever area that they are in. They also talk about the exploitation of working people, people that are employed for the Olympic events, and also the athletes themselves. And before you say, well, can't we just negotiate and figure it out and find a way to do a better Olympics? Well, that's been tried. That's been tried before, as often is the case. And they also have a section about negotiation. We are not able to negotiate with these investors because their purpose in investing in these games is for their own financial benefit. And so they don't really care if we have a problem with the Olympics or we don't like how they do it, and there is a track record of that. So what now? What do we do now that we know all of this information? Well, the very least we can do, I think, this year is to boycott the Olympics. Don't watch it. That is what I'll be doing because it's just not worth it for me since learning this information and really going deeper with it. And especially as somebody that lives in a city that is about to go through this very thing unless we can put a stop to it, I think it's really important for us to reconsider the costs of our entertainment. Is it really worth it to do damage to working class people around the world just so that we can watch some sports games? And if you want to go further than boycotting the Olympics, you can go to noolympicsla.com for a whole bunch of resources. And also, if you would like to get involved in this transnational movement, I'll make sure to put that link in the show notes. Today on the podcast, I talk about transiting Mars in Gemini and how we can work with that energy. Then stay tuned for your forecast of the energy of the week ahead. So Mars is in the sign of Gemini. This is transit Mars we're talking about, so it applies to all of us regardless of where the signs in your chart are. And that's what a transit means. It means where a planet is at the current moment. So Mars has been in the sign of Gemini since July 20th, so we've gotten a little taste of it. And it'll be in Gemini until September 4th. So how can we make the best use of this energy on a personal level? Well, this energy might have felt a bit dramatic so far, and that's because of the Pluto action that's happening in the mix of it all. Because, again, anytime we're talking about any given planet for a transit, it's always going to depend on what all of the other planets are doing as well. So if you're listening to this in the future, during a different Mars and Gemini transit, it's not going to be the same. It will not apply in the same way. Will there be some common things? Yeah, it's Mars in Gemini, but it's not exactly the same. Nothing is ever the same twice, which is a really important thing to know if you're interested in astrology or if you're studying astrology. So if you're like, oh, last time Mars was in Gemini, my whole family left me. Well, like, that's not the same. It's not the same. I'm sorry that happened to you. But Queen, we are in a different time. It's a different flavor. So this transit starts off with more intensity with that Pluto energy, but by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be letting up. But you may have found that there is this energy of like, oh, maybe the things that I'm doing and the way that I'm approaching them could be better. It might be that things that haven't been working for you are revealing themselves during this time. And especially with Mars and Gemini, it's really not a bad time to change your approach. Can it be annoying to find out that there's a better way to do something that you've already been doing? Yeah, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do the thing better. So you could be exploring your options, practicing different ways of approaching something or some things. And as I've said before, 2024 to me is really about getting us ready for the future that we're heading into, because it's going to ask us to do things differently in many different ways. So I would pay attention to the things that are coming up now that just aren't working the way that you need or want them to, because there's a strong possibility that some element of it needs to evolve so that you can meet the future that we're all heading into more empowered. In astrology, Mars is the planet of action, and the sign that it's in is the quality of that action, what's going to be more emphasized for this time period. And you may have noticed that the energy did pick up recently, and Mars moving into Gemini is part of why. We recently wrapped up Mars in Taurus, which was pretty wild because of other transits going on. But generally, Mars in Taurus is a much slower, steadier energy, whereas Mars in Gemini is quick, it's fast. So you might find yourself just feeling more active in general. You may notice that your curiosity is being stirred up. There may be things that you just want to explore, you want to look into, new hobbies that you want to try, things that you want to pick back up. All of that is just totally on par for this energy, because Gemini is the sign of the learner, and we learn a lot by doing things and doing different things, interacting with different people, communicating, playing. But there's always this element of satisfying curiosity, because Gemini is an intellectual sign. It does not like to be bored. If anything, it tends to be more overcommitted and like jack of all trades, master of none. So my suggestion for dealing with that energy, and that's all good, but try to remember, we can't do it all. So if a lot of things are piquing your curiosity and you're sending yourself out in a million different directions, what I would do is try to prioritize the things that you're really excited about or the things that you can really benefit from, because it may feel like you can do it all and you can do it all at the same time, and oh, I'm such a good multitasker and da da da. And oftentimes, especially if it's something that is important or that we really care about, we can find ourselves spreading ourselves very thin. And, you could do that. It's your prerogative, but something to watch out for as we move further into this energy. And again, with Gemini, that intellectual stimulation is so important. So my suggestion for dealing with this is to also rotate activities. So if you're doing something that you're interested in, you may feel yourself at some point kind of getting bored or even losing focus on things, maybe even more quickly than you might otherwise. So what I like to do is stay aware of where the energy is as much as possible. So if you're losing steam on something, try switching to something else that feels more exciting. And that way you can kind of sample platter your way through the things that you need and want to do. And that's something that I've had to get really good at. My natal Mars, the Mars in my birth chart, is in Gemini. So I have become very practiced at this kind of spinning many plates thing. And I'll just kind of rotate which plate I'm focusing on at a certain given time. And it helps me stay really invested in what I'm actually doing And hopefully I'm doing things that are more mentally stimulating to me. And once it kind of tires itself out, I'm like, well, I got a bunch of other stuff to do, so I'll switch to one of those that sounds better. And that's worked really well for me. Mars and Gemini, I also have ADHD. I can be all over the place. But when you got a lot of things to do, just flipping through them as you feel interested can be a huge lifesaver. This is also a great time to be aware of the power of your words. So if you are a writer, this can be a really great time for you to focus on any projects that you have. If you are just a regular person that communicates with other people, you might want to just watch that your tone doesn't maybe sound a little sharper than you intended. It's a good time to just pay some extra attention to tone and how things can come across. And also just be aware that other people's tones might feel a little sharper than they actually intend. Especially people who are not very conscious of themselves or the energy, the vibe, they can't read their room, those kind of people, they could very well be kind of popping off with this energy, and maybe stay clear of them or just have the expectation that that's a possibility and act accordingly. If there's something that you're really passionate about, that you feel really connected to, and it involves writing or communication in some way, because not all communication is written. It can be spoken. We can communicate through artistic or creative means. There are a lot of options. But if there's something that is really important, that is really driving you in this moment, that can also be getting a boost. So there may be some things that you feel very driven to communicate during this time period. And if you listen to this podcast, might I suggest communicating with your elected officials or other representatives, especially locally. Like, this is a really great time to go ham on those elected officials, call their offices, write them emails, write them letters, let them know if they're doing things that are bad for the people that they represent. Will they listen? Maybe not, but it'll be fun and it'll let off some steam. And speaking of local officials, this would be a great time to get involved in community organizing or mutual aid projects that are happening in your neighborhood or your physical community. And if there aren't existing projects that you can join in on, maybe it's time to look at starting something, because surely there are things that you have to give that other people need. And that's really the basis for mutual aid. It doesn't have to be complicated. And those kind of efforts bring people together. So Mars in Gemini is a great time to connect with people that live physically near you and to invest more in your community, to be active in your community, making those relationships, building connections. And it doesn't mean that everybody is your best friend. I think Gemini energy is very aware that you can have connections to people that you don't necessarily have like a deep personal relationship with. But you do share space. That's enough. That is enough to have in common with somebody to work with them. And when you're doing that, you're strengthening the connections in your community overall. You're making sure that there are more opportunities for people to connect with each other, to share resources with each other, to support each other in whatever ways that we can. And that's really the essence of what we need going into Pluto in Aquarius. We need strong connections with people that are local to us, but also abroad, that are further away from us, like, maybe me and you. We might not be in the same place. But Mars in Gemini is really putting a sharper focus on the people that we share physical space with, that we come into contact with, going about our day-to-day activities. And some of us might be on the defensive with strangers, that people that we don't know, even if we do share space with them. And we might have very good reasons for that defensiveness. But for this Mars and Gemini transit, I'm going to ask that we not worry so much about being defensive. Because with Mars and Gemini, we can lean into letting go of things that aren't of interest. And we can let them fall away rather than just having to get into it. So relax your defenses if you have any. If there's stuff that really bugs you and you're usually on edge about them, we can kind of experiment with allowing. trusting yourself to know that you can adapt, adjust, and if needed, bounce from situations or people that aren't serving you or getting you further along to where you're trying to go. But I find when we're involved with building relationships locally, it is important to relax our defenses. That doesn't mean putting ourselves in dangerous situations or tolerating bad behavior. But what it does mean is coming to people with an open mind that maybe there is something that you have in common. Maybe there is something that you can work together on. Or maybe there's something that you can learn from one another. And if we have our defenses up, if we've already decided, I don't like the people in my community, or there's nobody there that likes me or feels like I do, we're closing out opportunities before they've even presented themselves. And with Mars in Gemini, the opportunity for connection is really all around us. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. And even the most different among us have a lot more in common than the powers that be would like us to recognize. Because it benefits those powers that we continue to be defensive and disconnected and distrustful of our neighbors, that people would rather argue with one another than use their words to understand each other and work through things in some way. As we move towards mid-August, that Mars in Gemini energy is going to be really loud. It's going to be very pronounced because Mars is going to be moving closer to Jupiter. So if there are projects that you're really leaning into for Mars in Gemini, by the time that we hit mid-August, you might be surprised to find out how much those projects have expanded. Or maybe your interest in them is what's expanding. Because sometimes when we go down those little curiosity rabbit holes, or we fuck around and do a little mutual aid in the community, we find that there's actually a lot more there than we thought. And we might want to go deeper. We might want to broaden our vision of what we thought was possible. So as we approach mid-August, I can very much see that happening for many of us. And then towards the end of Mars in Gemini, in late August and early September, we will have Mars squaring off with Neptune in Pisces. That could have us feeling a little slower, a little dreamier, but also potentially more creative. So it'll be a great time to act on your inspiration and maybe even surprise yourself with the results. You might find during this time period that you feel more connected or drawn to your spirituality. And you might even find yourself talking to the universe or your higher power or whoever more than normal. And it may also be that the universe is talking back, so make sure that you're listening for that as well. Sometimes it happens in words, but sometimes it's signs, sometimes it's paths opening up, sometimes it's the right person in the right place at the right time. If you are a person who, like me, has their Mars in Gemini, here's what that means for you. Some point during this period of time, you will have your Mars return. And what that means is that Mars is in the same position as it was when you were born. And a Mars return happens approximately every year and a half-ish. And like any planetary return, all that it means is that it's the end of a cycle and the beginning of a new cycle. It does not last the entire time that Mars is in Gemini, but it is the moment that Mars is in the exact position, so the exact degree and minute that it was in your birth chart. So what should you do for your Mars return? Well, the advice that I was given is that it's a really good idea to do things on your Mars return that you want to spend the next year and a half doing more of. Think of it as kind of like setting the tone. And if you are newer to astrology and you're like, oh my God, I have never thought of this before, don't worry. Every single one of us has had planetary returns that we were not conscious of. So if you miss it, it's not the end of the world. And regardless of whether or not we're having a Mars return, this Mars in Gemini, it is always a great idea during this transit to approach things with a sense of humor. We're probably going to need it because this shit show ain't stopping anytime soon. And if there's one thing I've learned from having my Mars in Gemini, it's that you gotta laugh. You gotta laugh. You gotta laugh. So remember that no matter what you're doing this Mars in Gemini, you don't have to leave your sense of humor behind. And in fact, the ability to laugh things off and blow off some steam is a sign of resilience to me. It's energy work. It's actually probably the biggest form of energy work that I personally participate in, because humor has kept me alive to this point. I'm not exaggerating that at all. So keep it cute, keep it moving, keep it connected, and remember to laugh. You know, 2024 doesn't really get any less exciting. There's not going to be a die down in all of the news that we've had. So I don't come on here every week and repeat myself. I try not to. But that's going to stay true. That's going to stay true. And I've tried to prepare people as much as possible for that, because 2024 is just a lot. There's a lot going on. There's a lot happening. But one of the good things about living in a time that is very interesting is that it offers a lot of opportunities for us to grow, to understand ourselves better, to build something that's truly more aligned with us, and also to break out of a lot of old patterns, because we are being shaken up and it's uncomfortable in the moment, but a lot of good can come out of it. And I really want us to keep that in mind as we travel through Pluto in Aquarius together. So Wednesday, the day that this podcast comes out, July 24th, Netanyahu is supposed to speak to Congress that day. And so just on a collective level, I am expecting that there will be major and very vocal protests. So I think that, as usual, as we should have come to expect by now, the authorities, I think, are going to come down hard on protests, so nobody can be surprised about that at this point, I think. But, you know, practice all safety. And I think it's really important that people are continuing to put pressure on the government, because just because Biden is out of the race doesn't mean that there's not an active genocide that we're funding continuing every single day and escalating, and it's not being talked about as much as it was. So it's really important that we don't forget that lives are on the line, and I support the people that are going to be out there protesting this week. I have a feeling that there will be a lot of protests this week, because I think this is just fanning the flames of an already really explosive issue. Thursday, that's July 25th, we've got Mercury moving into Virgo. And with the rest of the astrology that day, the energy could feel a little bit sharper, I would say, particularly mentally. So, you know, it might be a day that you find that you're kind of on the busy side. And if you're not already busy, it's not a bad day to have an activity, have something to do. You probably will notice the energy shift, because we'll be kind of feeling the build up towards that on Wednesday and then rolling right into Thursday. Mercury is going to be moving into Virgo at 3:41 p.m. Pacific time, and we're heading towards a Mercury retrograde on August 5th, and then Mercury is going to retrograde back into Leo. I'm going to talk about that at a later time, but just know that that is the direction that we're heading in generally. And retrogrades, if you're new here, never a bad thing, just a different flavor of energy, and we can work with that. But with Mercury in Virgo, we're going to be able to really zoom in a lot more. Our mental acuity might be a little bit sharper. It's good energy for getting shit done, getting yourself and your daily life together, maybe thinking about your health and your wellness a little bit more, maybe adjusting the things that you're eating, the things that you're doing with your body. It can be very easy to forget to actually think about those things. And I think we have a tendency to think that the mundane aspects of our daily lives, or sometimes even just having a body, is part of our spirituality. So, don't ever think that Mercury in Virgo is not a spiritual moment, because taking care of your body can be part of your spirituality. So it's possible that it's going to be a time where you're thinking about those things more. With Mercury in Virgo, I want to watch us being overly critical of ourselves or others, because when we notice a lot of stuff, it's easier to do that. We might notice ourselves getting a little bit more irritated at small things or just fixating on things, and that's not always the most helpful place to be. So we're going to try to notice that stuff more so that we can practice sifting and sorting through helpful thoughts and thoughts that kind of zero in on stuff that's not actually that important. Because it's easy to spin your wheels with that Mercury in Virgo energy. So, either way it happens, Mercury in Virgo is going to be a useful energy. We can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. We can learn from being frustrated by everything, or, we can use it very constructively, managing our affairs, sorting things out. Friday, I'm not going to say everybody's going to have an amazing day, but I think Friday looks to me like it can be a very fun and expressive day. It's a day where you might feel a little bit more spontaneous than usual. It could be that you do something that you didn't necessarily plan to do. I think just looking at that weekend, the protests are going to be lit. They're going to be loud. If you find yourself in a protest situation and you haven't already tried earplugs, for those of us who are very sensitive and overstimulated easily, that is a strategy that I would personally employ. But it's a good day to do something that you feel passionate about, and maybe it's something that you're inspired to do. It might be something that you don't even plan ahead. It just kind of happens, and that can be really beautiful too. So we have to remember to take the moments of joy when we can get them. And I don't think that means that we have to close out the rest of the world and not do our organizing work and make a lot of decisions that come at the expense of other people. I don't think that that's how it has to work. But I do think it's important to remember why we're doing this, because joy is important. Cultivating joy is important. And, people that are on the receiving end of American bombs deserve joy, just like we do. So Saturday, the energy, the vibes are going to shift. They're going to feel probably just like a little weightier. Might not be as, fast moving as the previous day. And so the weekend to me feels a little bit more low key, a little bit more restful. I think a lot of us are going to probably find ourselves wanting our comfort foods and maybe some alone time, maybe some connection with nature or with your body or with both, and really head into next week more centered. So kind of take advantage of this weightier energy to kind of get yourself sorted, do a little self-care this weekend. And then Monday, July 30th, here in the US, the Monday morning looks like a Monday morning, unfortunately. It looks like a little bit frustrating. It looks like those of us who have to go to a job somewhere will probably be like, I wish I wasn't here. I'm sorry to tell you that. And then the moon moves into Gemini at 2:27 p.m. Pacific time. And I think from there and later in the day for us West Coast people that the energy will pick up a little bit, feel things getting moving. And just because it feels like a Monday, again, doesn't mean it's going to be a bad day. You just might be dragging a little bit. It's always a good time for a little treat, in my opinion, especially on a Monday that's kind of draggy or a little bit frustrating or not going the way that you expected it to go. So, maybe a little treat Monday morning. And Tuesday, Wednesday, I feel like we could see some hairy world events. I'm not really going to get into that. That's not really my lane at the moment. But I do think that in general, the energy is a little bit more vibrant on Tuesday and Wednesday. So I think there will be a lot of moments this week where we can progress, especially in terms of our mindset and just kind of little tweaks and adjustments that we're making to improve our day-to-day experience and center ourselves and connect with what we're passionate about. So remember your deep breaths. I think that we can all say that we're building a much stronger spiritual practice because we're going through a lot of information right now, a lot of energy shifts. And not only is it exhausting, we're like processing so much information, we're trying to survive, a lot of us, and, it's a lot. And we want to take care of ourselves the best we can, and I think that this energy is teaching us how to do that better. And we're getting our reps in, I think Virgo energy with Mercury in Virgo is going to be very helpful for this, because we're going to be able to see like, oh, these things are not working. That's what Virgo energy is really good at. It's good at making stuff better. Sometimes it's annoying when you get somebody pointing out like, oh, you're not doing that right. And it's also annoying when you're the one pointing out like, oh, you're not doing that right. You should probably fix that. But when you do the thing better, when you figure out a better way of doing things, you're ultimately making your day-to-day life easier to live. You're making yourself more available to connect with your spirituality. Now, if you are a sponsor of this podcast over on Patreon, you currently have a discount available to you on birth chart readings with me, and you can book one for yourself or a friend as a gift, and you can book one of those readings with me anytime through the end of July. And you can schedule for any time between August and September, so it's not like you have to do it right away. But I don't run sales that often, so I'm hoping to get to read for a lot more of you, to get to talk about you. We go deeper into your birth chart. We talk about you, your gifts, your abilities, your strengths, your challenges. And it's one of my favorite readings to do, because I think that people come out of the reading feeling much more clear about who they are and what they value, and hopefully where you want to go next. So if you are not a sponsor on Patreon, you still have time to join and take advantage of this sale. It starts at $5 a month, and you get access to a whole library of content. We've got the Astro Den Discord community where you can connect with other people talking about astrology, spirituality. We have a fire meme channel. We have a pet channel, so we get to see a lot of cute animals. It's a really great space to hang. And if you are in my manifesting circle, and I wish you were, we are doing a very casual Discord hang on July 25th in our special manifesting circle Discord. It's been a long month, so we're just going to catch up, enjoy some good energy, and get to know each other a little better. And if you're like, I don't know about all that, that is totally fine. You can join my Patreon for free. There's a comment section for every one of my public podcast episodes, and you get updates about the podcast and other goodies from me too. You can find that link in the show notes. That's all for this week. Tune into next week's episode of Petty Astrology. I'm going to be talking to a baddie who is going to teach us a thing or two about what that means. This episode was made possible by my sponsors over on Patreon.